Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the Atlanta Regional Championship results. This is the first major we had with Journey Together Legal. So we're going to look at the day 1, day 2 breakdown, as well as the deck list that ultimately did the best. Just as a sort of like metagaming case study, I did just want to quickly look at how things were doing in the online spaces and what the general sentiment was. So we're going to look at the decks that were doing well in the online scene in the sort of couple of weeks leading up to Atlanta, where Dragapult was by far and away the best performing deck, and the Dustomer was the most prevalent of the bunch, also very, very much so the most played archetype when you combine all the variants. But also straight Dragapult was doing pretty well. If it was just treated as its own standalone deck, the Dustomer would still be the best deck, but like in the A tier. And then the pure Dragapult would be just above Raging Bolt here in like the B tier, if you want to split them out into individual variants, whereas the Dango and the Iron Thorns would both be in the sort of D-C tier range, which is quite interesting actually, because there are some decent performances for Dengopult that we'll look at in a moment. And yeah, Archaludon, a lot of poison Archaludon in the online scene. Tanking Terapagos was the deck sort of climbing in the weeks in the last online sort of tournaments because it was capitalizing on Terabox, and I think there definitely was a sentiment because it was, you know, a deck created or at least made more infamous by Tord Reklev and some of the Americans that made it over to that big Japanese Champions League tournament with good results, as well as other Japanese players, of course, doing well with it. Where Terabox definitely was like public enemy number 1. It was the second most played in the online scene, so a lot of people were testing it in the build up to this tournament, but there was also the counters. Certainly this deck kind of was conceived as more of a counter archetype, somewhat Archaludon as well, and that it's hard for Terabox to reload Pikachu too often. So both these archetypes in part are trying to counter that Terabox, and even to an extent, seeing like more stamps in Pulse versus Crystals is also to try and counteract this. So even though this is just like the 4th best deck performing in the online scene, it was right on everyone's radar. So that's an interesting case study as to how the format develops, because we'll see in a moment the stage 2s definitely had the last laugh in Atlanta, overall in how the sort of top cut transpired, and I imagine the format's going to shift now around probably Dragapult and Gardevoir more heavily than the online focus that was much more focused on Terabox by the looks of things. Lots of Gholdengo, lots of Raging Bolt. They're like 5th and 6th best performers, but the 3rd and 4th most played. So they're actually not having the best overall win rates, which is quite interesting. And then Hop Zacian, randomly really, really popular online. I was saying this in the tier list that this is like a fake deck, but yeah, kind of interesting. Gardevoir hanging out at like the 9th most played and one of the lower end of performing. That's like the 9th most performing deck as well. And then Zoroark and then some of the other stuff down here. I definitely remember noting that Flareon was ludicrously underplayed in that it saw less play than Mamoswine and Slowking, and even like straight Charizard, like these sorts of archetypes that were really falling away. This was criminally underplayed, I think, which was something I was noting in the online scene. And when we look at the OmniPoke tier list that we did pre-Atlanta, just again, I'm rambling a bit now, but just to see how right we were in the overall metagame, we were very close on the Dragapult, Dustomer, Terabox percentages and the Terra Noctowl percentages. We were also very close on the Archaludon. This was encompassing all the Arch, but we just talked about Poison as like the little picture here. What we underestimated when we look at the day 1 data is the popularity of Gholdengo and Raging Bolt specifically, which is an interesting case study to look at. But as you can see, we had Flareon in like that B tier, also like Frostlass Munkidori, as these are decks that are underplayed in the format but have a real reason to be played in the game, which is kind of interesting. And I think we'll see some of that representation of Flareon, and I think going ahead this is going to be like a deck climbing in the metagame, because it is, as we'll see momentarily, an interesting archetype in that it has a few unique boasts about it that other decks can't really do. So that's my little preamble before we get to the tournament itself, just to try and formulate the sort of consensus of the player base before looking at the day 1 metagame, which we can look at now, where Dragapult was that 16%, definitely out and away as the most popular archetype. Then Gholdengo and Raging Bolt, like I said, more popular than I expected, but these are still some of the strongest, most simplistic decks in the game, that they very consistently create a 3-attack game plan to win the game, so they're keeping a lot of decks honest in that regard. They have that high damage output, which can be pesky for Dragapult, of course. Gholdengo often playing the Professor Tourist scenario in addition to Munkidori to offset some of the Dragapult math. The Raging Bolt can easily play the Tool Jammer as well as the Bravery Charm in the list. It's weird to have the combination of the two, but they both help out in the matchup in that Raging Bolt can shut down Crystal or shut down EXP share. So when they are getting those one-hit KOs, it's hard for Dragapult to re-establish the next one. At the same merit, having the Tool Jammer can remove from play some of your damaged Pokemon when you have Area 0 down, so you can offset some of their stuff, and the Bravery Charm is giving you buff of hit points. So kind of interesting in that regard how these are trying to cash in on Dragapult to an extent. Now, yes, Dragapult has Budgie, which is really pesky for Gholdengo. They have to really manage their energy quite efficiently and utilize, sometimes preemptively using their superiors quite often to make that work, or just have higher raw energy counts in their deck so they're not completely wrecked by sort of mid to late game itchy pollens. And Raging Bolt, of course, also has to be worried about how many multi-prizes, low hit pointers that they put into play that your opponent can play around, obviously, because it strips all of its energy off the board. There are other issues there that Pult can take advantage of, like Dusknoir, for example, on Squawkabilly and this, that, and the other, for them to take big 6-prize swings if they're Ionoing you low, and punching into a Bolt or into one of the two 10 hit point mons, that can be quite beneficial. So they're by no means amazing into Pult, but you can see why the large consensus of players went for this approach. Also, I think Raging Bolt just inherently is a much easier to play choice than both the tankier Terapagos and the Ogerpon toolbox, the Terra box, where it's Pikachu and the Teal Mask and the Wellspring and whatnot. But it's really interesting to me that there was still a decent amount of people piloting Terra box, but it does seem to be preemptively going into the tournament kind of bullied by a lot of people, by this is the Terra Noctowl definitely had good online data outside of the Terra box, but one of its best matchups was a 70% win rate into Terra box. So people were definitely trying to counter this deck. It felt like going into the tournament. And then Archaludon, less popular than the online spaces, but still having decent representation. Not sure how much that's going to change coming into the next few events, to be honest with you. I think if I had to put my finger on anything, it would be Raging Bolt decreasing from here. Gholdengo is still doing okay. I feel like these are both going to be in contention in the top 6 or so of most popular decks. And Archaludon, it didn't flop the event by any means. I think Gardevoir's the most likely deck to sort of start creeping in, possibly Flareon as well, because that also had some pretty strong placements and has good logic behind that as well. Let's have a look. Before we look at the deck list, actually, let's have a look at that day 2 metagame share then and how these deck performed. Dragapult, wow. For the most popular deck in the room to have not been countered enough is insane. We all knew Dragapult was S tier. Everyone knew that. And still, it had insane conversion. That's one of the strongest conversions we've seen of a top deck for a long time. Typically, what you see is the best deck in the room sort of holds steady, and that's a pretty good tournament for it if its day 1 to 2 conversion is pretty solid. The fact that it did so well shows that this is at a really high power level and wasn't specifically prepared for enough by the player base. The decks that really fall off are the Raging Bolt, like I mentioned, from the previous 6, and it's that Gardevoir that's cashing in by jumping in quite nicely. Archaludon held a bit better than the Terra box, and Gholdengo actually did pretty well as well, going above its initial percentage, and Noctowl, Terapagos, a tankier, slower approach, did just fine as well. So definitely seems like Gardevoir was under-respected, also possibly benefiting from the lack of the Wellspring Mask decks. I still feel like Terra box is very solid into Guardian Pulse, but I think one thing we have to bear in mind is that the more stamp there are in the Stage 2 decks, the worse the Terra box is into them. So the Pulse that are playing Crystal, that's really good for Terra box. The Guardies that are playing Secret Box, that's really good for Terra box. If we start to see a more fluid spread of ace-specs in the Stage 2s, that can only benefit this aggressive archetype where Wellspring, not just once but twice, even under Budgie, just becomes absolutely devastating. So these are things to bear in mind. I think that's one of the big question marks of this format, that it was a really uninspired tournament for Terra box overall, and I still have my finger on it doing only better from here in the next couple tournaments, if I was looking at Severe or anything like that. Or even Portland, for example, that's where my head's at, but possibly it's just too difficult to play, or not worth the headache of playing compared to the Stage 2 decks. Let's have a look at the top 8 then in more detail. I think it was 10 players actually, was it not in, or was it just 9 players in ASIM? I feel like it was 9. Yeah, I think that's right. I'll have to look back at PokerStats. But anyway, it was Henry Chao getting his 3rd regional win in the season. If you didn't go back and watch the game, it's worth sitting through all the itchy pollens to get the thrill of the ending, and I think just skipping towards the final game won't give you the sense of joy and excitement that I got watching it live, because I had to sit through really careful cat and mouse gameplay with itchy pollen. Now, it's very easy to say, like, oh, Budgie's a problem. There's been all this, like, storm on Twitter about, like, this card needs to go, it's unhealthy and whatnot. We've seen this a million times before. Plus, the only reason it was this crazy stalemate that Henry... Well, not even a stalemate. It was basically, like, slow checkmating Hedrick. The only... like, the Budgie's front and center itchy pollening, but the context of the board was the most important thing here. If ever there was action from Hedrick, there was an immediate Mew copying Dragapult via Lily's Clefairy for a one-hit KO on the active, plus Monkey Dory, plus 6 damage counter placement on the Dracloak. So Henry had to wait till he just had an extra Dreepy down to do anything. So he was just slow passing, working until he could find a third Dreepy to actually do anything before he got immediately board wiped. And that's not Budgie at all. That's the context of Monkey Dory, Lily's Clefairy, Mew EX. So, like, everyone hating on that game because it's Budgie, like, sure, Budgie has its downsides in a format, and it makes people adapt their decks accordingly, but the entire rest of the deck that Henry was playing is the actual context as to why it became that board state for so long. Does that make sense, the itchy pollening? I feel like this is still one of the best, like, weapons they could give setup decks in general, and I think generally in the game, people like to play setup style, build a game plan strategy style decks, more than just like Unga Bunga, we're all playing our like 4-turn clock 3-attack deck, and like let's see who navigates the opening hands better. Like, I don't think that's interesting, and I think there's a lot of those sorts of decks in the format actually. Like, looking at Dengo and Raging Bolt, they make the game so simple into like how to map and like how to use your boss and counter catchers and whatnot, and like utilize your single prize attacker. That's like the most simple game of Pokemon you could possibly play, compared to playing against Gardevoir and Dragapult, where there's so much depth, you know? And I think Budgie, even though it's like a crude answer into like how we can make that happen, I still feel like it's a really good card for the game, actually. That's just my hot take, and I know a lot of people hate that take, in that it is still a punisher of bad hands, and I wish there was some sort of solve for that, you know? It doesn't seem like there is a solve, unless, like, Itchy Pollen could only be used if you're behind on prizes, but I feel like we already have enough, like, behind on prizes manipulation stuff anyway, so, yeah, I think this is just the best solution that we have. Talking about Henry's list in more detail, then, we know that he is just like Gardevoir King at this point, and he's seen all sorts of iterations and found ways to win in multiple formats with this archetype. The innovation from Henry this time around was a 1-2 line of Zoroark EX, and I'm in a way proud that I identified Gardevoir and Zoroark being a good pairing together, because even on my top 10 lists, I had Zoroark in there. But Henry's, like, the reason why it's in Henry's deck is completely different to the reasoning I had as to why it was in my deck. So I was kind of wrong anyway as to why Zoroark is in here. But it's cool to see that trade is like back in the deck. Refinement never left kind of vibes with the Zoro in here, which is really cool. Like, my logic was that you could play TM Evo and Arven, so that you could get into Zoroark and at least start trading under Budgie Lock, and get into Curlier so you didn't have to worry about not candying, right? But there's no TM Evo or Arven in the list whatsoever. Instead, it's Iono, Research, Morty's Conviction, which gives you even more discard synergy for Psychic Energy, the 1 Jacques to help you get some evolutions, as well as 2 Turo Scenario. Now, Turo Scenario is already good in Gardevoir, we've seen it previously. Lets you do all sorts of like board fixing, lets you get rid of multi-prizes that your opponent might be trying to boss to like win the game on. It lets you reset Monkey Dory and like reattach Adrenabrain, but also it now allows you to move your Zoroark EX. I think the 2 Turo and the 1 Rescue board, a lot of the reason why that's there is so that you can move that Zoroark. So that's a big thing to bear in mind. Also, there is just the secret box in here. Henry has played the secret box a lot in the Gardevoir. He really likes it. It does give you access to consistency in the opening game, where you can get Artisan Poffin. It can get you Bravery Charm, which can buff up your Budgie as well as your other stuff. Obviously, your attackers here, the Drifloon and the Screamtail, but also just protect things against Monkey Dory and whatnot as well. Also, Bravery Charming Mew is a huge headache for the Dragapult players, unless they play Defiance Band or something like that. it can just be like checkmate on the spot at times. So, and yeah, the rescue board can enable you to budge you in some instances, but also it's going to find its way onto Zoroark a lot of the time as well, I would imagine. So it's much less likely to be trapped. Playing a 1-2 line because it's easier to find your Zoruas and you only really want one in play. I was experimenting with the 2-2 line, but I do see this being really reasonable as well. My solution, rather than Rescue Board, was having Arven plus Energy Switch in the deck, because E-Switch was good on monkeys anyway, and you could, like, manually attach and, like, embrace and retreat the Zorro. But I think Tutoro on board makes a lot more sense, because you can just sit with board here, which is kind of good. But if ever you thicken the Zorro line, maybe it is back to Arven. I'd be interested in your thoughts of, like, Arven Evo versus just, like, raw draw supporters, because I think there is going to be more of a push towards let's just play really healthy counts of Iono, Research, even Morty, and the likes of Brock, Scouting, and Jacques. I think we're going to slowly see those counts bolster more and more, and more middling counts of the Ball Search cards that we've seen, you know, historically be like 12 in every deck, you know, the 4/4/4 counts, that sort of thing. But then Henry has like the no-nonsense counts really, just 3 Poffin, 2 Nest, 2 Ultra, 2 Vessel, the double Candy, which we haven't always seen like high Candy, but when you're not playing Evo, you kind of have to. Double CC, no boss in the deck, by the way, so it's just Screamtail, which, you know, there's no check to Screamtail anymore, so you can always access your opponent's bench with this card, but also the double Countercatcher lets you do like additional trapping plays or bring other stuff up so you can attack with your other attackers. The Night Stretchers to recover the stuff. A slightly thinner count of Night Stretcher that we've seen in a lot of the Gardevoir lists. We often see 3/4, but it's 1 Rod, double Night Stretcher in this case. Maybe an indication that you're Turoing monkeys a lot more in the deck, so you can do like a weird play of like Turo, Rod, Vessel out Dark, Adrenabrain, like plays like that. Because anytime you can get an extra monkey in, it's just so crazy, right? Yeah, Turo is just such a good card in this deck. Like, not just against... Well, it's great against aggressive decks because you can use Fez and Mew and like pick them back up. You can like heal your guys so much. I think the double Turo is so good, and that is something that Henry's done in the past. It's not just a new like Zoroark thing, but it lets you play 2, which is such a good deal. So yeah, I think this list is really cool. I think I still want to experiment with an Arven Evo build because I still am so enamored by TM Evolution, but I do really like the way that Henry's built the list. I think if you play Stamp, you have to go Arven, right? But if you want to continue with Box, you go down this direction. The long story short is I do love the Zoroark in the deck, and it's been something that I've been preaching this whole time, even though I had a build nowhere near as good as this one. By the way, it wasn't just Henry playing this. Josh Frink, Bradner, Davidson, some of the best US players played the same 60 and all had really good results, right? Top 32, 64, 128, really consistent finishes for that list generally. Let's jump down to Orlando's list of Gardevoir, which is a different one entirely, that also made top 8, because this is the one that we'd seen more in the online spaces, where it's just Gardevoir, triple Monkey Dory, double Budju, and then it has the attacking suite in 1 counts here. Another thing to note is, again, high research. So again, it's the same hypothesis of just increase your supporter counts. Let's bolster those counts so that when you get hit with Itchy Pollen, you actually have cards that still glow in your hand. It's like such a simple thing to bear in mind. When you are playing Blender, you naturally go higher Night Stretcher because it can enable you to Blender, then Stretcher, Candy, Guardy, or it can get you into Curlier and whatnot. That's good. The Blender becomes like a pseudo Ball Search card in that regard, and then it's just like better throughout the entire game. High Candy, high Bravery Charm. Yeah, this is the list that we kind of knew from the online scene before. Henry's was much more like imaginative, but that's not to take anything away from this list, because still bolstering those research counts is a big shout out for this 60 in particular. So another great placement for Gardevoir. But then we see the wave of Dragapults, and I think there's a really interesting split here of Dusknoir builds, one Dango build towards the top as well. Actually, and even in top 16 here, Rowan with a straight Pult. We'll have a look at all these in a moment, and also the Dusknoir builds. There is that tug of war going on. Hedrick getting another finals, his first loss in finals, I believe. He's got to, and just look at the placements behind this deck list. Aban, John, Kian, Grant, Mustafa, Rahul, Caleb, and Justin in the seniors division where this won. So this got second and first on the same weekend with the same deck list. So really good pedigree behind the list. We know that Andrew is, again, still one of the best players in the game. And again, I'm going to have to call back to elevated support accounts, where there's 2 Jacques in here. There is a debate of Jacques versus Brock Scouting. I think a mixture of the two is always reasonable, but in this case, it's double Jacques as well as double Dusclops. I really like double Clops, by the way. I think a 2-on-2 just doesn't make sense in a Budgie world, especially in Mirror. You have to evolve up your Clop straight away in Mirror, so I do really like this count, and it makes sense when you're playing double Jacques anyway. 2 research in here, bolstering those Arven counts as well. So, yeah, thick Dragapult as you'd expect, the double Budgie, does have the Blood Moon in here. No, like, energy acceleration whatsoever, not even any XP share, no Crispin whatsoever, just trying to, like, attach your way through the game as you Itchy Pollen and build up a board a lot of the time, and then you have the fallback of Blood Moon in those late game stages, which can attack for free in some instances as well. And as you know, you can take turns off as Pulse, really, because you know that you're building towards such big combos that the heavy counter catch, in addition to Boss's Orders, look how much Gust this has. You just do not whiff Gust with this list. You're constantly putting your opponent on the back foot, finding wiggle room moments with Itchy Pollen, or finding priority KOs via your Phantom Dive and just not whiffing whatever you want, which is such a big thing in the format. The power cards of Gust right now is a huge talking point in the game. Very high Night Stretcher count. You don't often see it that high with Dragapult either, which is interesting. The Quad Ultra Ball as well, not always seen in the list. And the Luxurious Cape, this is a really flexible, interesting card. Again, it can be used to, like, protect some of your stuff. Like Budgie getting a huge bolster in hit points is crazy. Protecting stuff from your opponent, just like Phantom Diving it down or something like that, is huge as well. So yeah, cool to see the Lux Cape. I think a lot of the time you see like Bravery Charm, but Lux Cape is pretty solid as well for that regard. And yeah, the stamp here, so you do have Arven Stamp if you want it to immediately disrupt the opponent with Stamp Pollen, as we know is a great like equalizing option that can get you back into games. So again, really well crafted list, and all I can really do is nod to the deck building and the players here. So Urban also in that top 8 with the exact same list. Let's have a look at Tanner's straight Pult, and again, a huge wave of players just sort of collaborated for this tournament. We have Tanner, we have Rowan in top 16, we have Steven Varesco in 128, and DJ Aline as well in that day 2. Another interesting 60 going on here, where we have the 3 copies of Luminous Energy, so no basic, no Vessel and no basic Dark, just the Luminous that can go on the monkeys, but it also means as you're reconning and looking for your second attachment that goes on Dragapult, that's always fine, and whatever you EXP share back, you still have the Luminous to attach to like fulfill your cost, which is kind of cool. The only thing you miss out on is like Night Stretcher synergy for the Monkey Dory, but that's like pretty okay. Other shout-outs here is that it does have the Ace Nullifier Genesect alongside 4 total tools. This is trying to shut down other Ace specs from opponents, so you don't have to fear Unfair Stamp, which is interesting if you want to be the one initiating prize race. You don't have to fear Prime Catcher, which is a big one in Raging Bolt. You don't have to fear all sorts of Ace specs. That's a pretty good deal. It's not something you can always like prioritize early. A lot of the time you're going to be prioritizing getting Budgie active, but the fact that you have Artisan and Arven in here means that when you do have that option, you can just grab that cheeky Genesect, which is kind of cool, to be fair. It definitely disrupts a decent amount of things. Even Crystal in Mirror as well. Denying that would be absolutely massive. So yeah, cool to see that's going on in the list. Again, the triple countercatcher double boss, this seems to be becoming more and more of a theme. I wonder if we'll see a flip-flop soon, where we just need to have more physical boss in an Itchy Pollen world, because we're getting to that tipping point of just needing more physical supporters in our deck. But again, the nice healthy 10 count of supporters, in this case it is still an Arven build. Interesting to not see Arven Evo. I think that's still one of the big selling points of Arven right now, is Evo, but I know you're both like Itchy Pollening into each other, I suppose, a lot of the time. Man, I feel like Evo is still such a boast, right? Go second, Evo, you just feel so powerful. I don't know, is it just me? Is it just me that thinks that? I mean, you don't have insane outs to do everything you want with it. Like, you don't always have the energy in hand to actually do the play, but I still feel like it's absolutely crackers a lot of the time, you know? The EXP share in here, the Defiance as well, so definitely recognition of like Mew trying to buff itself up with Bravery Charm. That's interesting. Because I know even tanky Terapagos with Bravery Charm can try and do that Mew copy thing with Clefairy if it really wants to, as well as Terabox. They don't oftentimes fit the Bravery Charm, but a tanky Terapagos can. So that's kind of interesting. let's have a look at some more straight pults. This one was Ceres, Sebastian, and Justin in here, so a couple more in that top 8. It's incredible how many of the same list popped up over and over again by different testing groups. Again, look how many supporters are in here. 4 Iono, 4 Arven, 2 Boss, 2 Jacques, 2 Crispin, so this is the only list where we see the energy acceleration, 2 Turo, and a Brock scouting. That is a lot of supporters. Favouring the Jacques, but still having the Brock in here. Interesting to get things going. The 2 Boss, 3 Counter Catcher, we're seeing it more and more often. That just lots of Gust is crazy right now. It does have the 1 Cheeky Luminous as well as the basic Dark, so it's kind of a best of both worlds when you play Rod and Night Stretcher that you can get that out. And I suppose you have Crispin as well, so sometimes you find the manual attachment for the Monkey. I guess that's the main argument to play Crispin. Sorry, Dark Energy over the Luminous is when you're playing Crispin. That makes sense. The Bravery Charm in here as well. I do like that just to buff up your Budew. Yeah, just all the main takeaway here is start bolstering those support accounts because Itchy Pollen is coming. I think that's the only thing to say. This is very similar to a format shift where we had Trash Launch Garbodor absolutely dominate some of the very first Guardians Rising tournaments. And then we started to see the cycle out of the Trainers Mails and the full VS Seekers and the maximum ball search cards. It feels like the general populace, obviously not the players who have done really well here, because they've all, that theme is showing up in all of these top 8 lists, but the general player base haven't adjusted to how important Itchy Pollen is as a win condition for these defensive decks. So now we'll start to see that knee-jerk of slowly cutting away from ball search cards and slowly cutting away from the other flexible item cards that we have in the game just to have supporter cards being bolstered. Research is back, even in not a quad research deck, just saying, hey, I have 2 spaces. They could be researchers, so when I get Itchy Pollen, I can see a fresh 7 and physically find my stage 1s or whatever else. I think that's the big sort of takeaway from this tournament, no doubt. Let's have a look at the only top 8ing list that wasn't Gardevoir or Dragapult of subdescription, and that is the tanky Terapagos. Some really interesting cards going on in the list as well. As you can see, what I thought this was very cool. It has the bait lightning energy. The reason why I say it's a bait is it has no function in the deck outside of being a different energy in your deck for Crispin, but it can bait Crown Opal. That's the only thing I can think of as why it's here, because this could always just be an extra dark energy, right? And yeah, it's purely a bait energy, which I think is such a cool idea. Just to get that out early and intimidate people or make them think weirdly around a Crown Opal. But yeah, it's a comical idea. I suppose the only upside is that why it's a lightning is that it can also be recovered by Levincia if randomly a golden, that's more optimal than the water or the grass bait energy, because that actually is a way you can get this energy back, which is kind of cool. So if you're going to bait, lightning is the optimal bait energy, which is such a funny thing to think. But yeah, tanky boof. You have the Volcanion to push your damage output, so Terapagos can hit 260, which is huge. Obviously, Gholdengo doing so well, that's massive. But also, similar to old Poison Terapagos, you can just take KOs with Beatdown without triggering Fez in a lot of opportunities. You have the Clefairy in here to do high damage output. You have the Monkey healing as well, so you have your... Well, you're trying to secure your Dragapult matchup this way. You're trying to be tanky into other matchups with the Bravery Charm boof and other stuff. And it does have the 101 Pidgeot, which I still think is very, very solid, especially when you play the Cyrano, right? You can turn 2 Dual Seek Cyrano. You can grab Fez, Lati, Pidge plus Candy, and then the Pidge gives you a refund on the next card. That's such a big deal. Obviously, when you're trying to weave in Volk as well, just getting access to a lot of these EXs is a lot of value. So I do like the value of this card a lot, and it's actually probably better than a Jacques that we've seen in some of the Noctowl Stage 2s that we've seen in the past. So that's a really cool addition. Anything else to really shout out? Prime Catcher was the ace spec of choice rather than having Scoop Up Cyclone, which you've sometimes seen. A couple Jet Energy in the list as well to overall bolster your switching cards, which is nice. Obviously, it makes your Blood Moon a more recyclable attacker, reusable. And obviously, this is a very bulky Blood Moon, right? Boof Blood Moon late game is just absolutely insane. So, yeah, pretty powerful list. I wouldn't be surprised if we start or continue to see this list over Terrabox. Again, I think it still has a more simplistic game plan than a pure Terrabox. And with Pidgeot as well, you just have that onboard security that a Terrabox doesn't really have too much, so that's cool to see. And we don't see much punishment for Gardevoir. Obviously, like the Dragapults do a little bit, but in a lot of other decks, you can get away with it. The other story of the tournament, really, I think, is Gholdengo. Like I said, it had a really good day 1 to 2, and it also finished pretty high, right? So here we have a straight Dango, just like old times Dango, really, where you've lost Greninja, but whatever, you can just cipher into what you need. Cypher Arven gives you so much access to that early eSearch Pro. We've got the TM Evo to just get into our bonuses. Yeah, not too much to be said about this list. It has the Monkey Turo that you'd expect. It does have some hand disruption. 12 energy total. The 2 lightning is interesting as well. Again, recognition that maybe someone will play Levincia for you, which is cool, I suppose. Yeah, overall, pretty solid list. Not too much to take away from the list. It's like just a straightforward 60. Grant Manley and a few others actually played. Caleb and Gabe, some high-profile American players, actually went with a Dango Pult, which has been a strange, like, memified deck because it's had those really high-profile placements in Japan, but never replicated until now in majors in the US. But it's finally happened where there's the 2/2/1 Pult line as well as 1 Monkey and the Gholdengo. The Crispin's in here so that you can power up the Pult, but also so that you can get the Monkey Dory activation that little bit easier. Arven Evo, again, just being such a powerful option here to Evo in the face of all sorts of things. And just get your engine online. Drakloak is good throughout every matchup, even if you don't need to have Phantom Dive plus Monkey Dory in any of the games. But the fact that you have the defensive mode of 2 Countercatcher, Dragapult attack plus Monkey Dory does give you, and the double Iono, you do have some defensive capacity, unlike a straight Dango, which is like all gas, and if you whiff, you whiff. The Vengeful Punch in here to try and play around Pika, you have to imagine, but maybe there's a world where it puts you in range of a Make It Rain a little bit easier later down the line or something. Yeah, again, like this is a list that we kind of know about. We've known the archetype, but it's just been maybe harshly underestimated. I mean, it didn't do that well in the online spaces before this tournament, and it is some high-profile players anyway getting like decent placements, and the shell of Dango's good anyway, and at the very least you're adding more draw to an already good deck, so it's never going to like flop. My question still remains is like, is this actually better than just playing a pure Pult with even more defensive capacity with Budew, or a more straightforward Dango? Maybe this is just better than straightforward Dango because of that flexibility that you have, like the fact that you can be aggressive and defensive compared to straight Dango. Yeah, that's still a question mark for me. There are some Flareons as well that did well. One in the top 16 and a few others in, or at least one other in top 32, and also in some of those high placements. Like, this was a deck that was criminally underplayed, like I said, towards the beginning of the video. And yeah, it seems like it's worth its weight. Like, it's a real deck, and it's another Jewel Seeker engine, so it's low maintenance. It has more reason to play Poffin, because you have your attacker as well as your Fan Rotom, and Fan Rotom can get all of it, which is great. You have Evolving Terrors, you have a basic, or a couple basic Terrors in here as well. You have the Terror Orb that can help you find your stage 1 pretty happily. It like adds to your overall counts towards getting a turn 2 Jewel Seeker, which is not bad. The main thing that I think is crazy about the deck is just the option to Briar, to be honest with you. There are so many of the, well, there's so much, specifically at this tournament, so much Bolt and so much Dango. And these are very fair decks in that they attack in, or they win in 3 attacks. Like, that is their entire thought process. That is their life cycle. That is their dream, right? And this deck can absolutely meme on that with a Briar play, where you can happily take 1, and then you know that you can just take 2 and then take 3 on your final knockouts with a Briar play. And just having that license, that freedom, especially into a Dango, right, that has to sit there and wait a lot of the time, or like find its random 1 prize attacker, and even then it's only taking 1. Like, it feels so bad. And as the Flareon side, especially into the Dango and the Bolt, where they play like 1 Iono and they have to time it to the best of their ability, and you sit there with Mew, Fez, and floating Hoot Hoot or 2, like, you know that you're just going to secure that Briar line and win the game, right? So it just feels very, very good. And it's a far cry from Zard, where you don't have the Dustoir to just, like, fix that map when you need to. But just the fact that you have Briar is a massive boast for this deck, to be honest with you. So I think this one card is the reason why this is like a consideration versus a Terrabox or versus a slow Terapagos. The other thing to bear in mind is that you do have that Sylveon Angelite attack as well that can just catch people sleeping a lot of the time. You choose two of your opponent's bench Pokemon, shuffle them in, and you can't use Angelite on the following turn. But against a lot of setup decks, they can have a really dominant board. Suddenly you can go CC Angelite, and then you're just like back in a good spot, you know? You get a free turn almost always, and they have to rebuild a lot. They've already spent candies. They have to like slow evolve a lot of the time. Certainly Dragapult slow evolves all the time. So they can be in really good positions and still just be hurt. And if you catch them in a bad spot as well, you can just leave them just completely wrecked. So it's at least a free turn in a lot of situations, and it can be more than that in a lot of spots as well. So this really takes advantage of all sorts of board positions and makes your opponent play so weirdly that they're not always going to be able to factor into the game plan as well, especially because this can come out of nowhere, right? Because you can Trumpet and Crispin and get it going in a turn. So it's something they can't always see coming, and it can absolutely wreck them. It still has the Clefairy and Mew, and Sylveon. All of these can attack and KO Dragapult, so no shortage of psychic guys that can swing into Pult, which is a big deal. And Flareon also like turns out good type coverage, right? When you can hit 130 and KO a Dengo whilst powering stuff up, that's pretty busted. So if Dengo's going to keep being this, you know, top 3, top 4 in popularity, Flareon is going to be laughing, to be honest with you. I feel like this deck is going to go on in leaps and bounds. I'm surprised to see that Unfair Stamp as the choice. Oftentimes online we saw Prime Catcher and Sparkling Crystal, but the Stamp is just another jump scare that you have at your disposal, you know? Like, why not? It just feels weird for a Noctowl deck to want to Stamp itself, because normally, like, you dual seek for the stuff you need. So this has to be, like, your second Noctowl use, and then you just end on Stamp and don't care what you draw into. It's a strange thing, but because you're so heavily tied to Crispin, I can see wanting to, like, Crisp plus Stamp. If that's, like, your dual seeker, that's just pretty good, honestly, so I can see that going pretty well. Yeah, the EVs are definitely a thing, definitely solid, and they can fit in just about enough kooky things that it's, again, like it has creative lines of play. As I was able to do well with the Poison Archaludon. This is one of the more disliked decks in the game because of the donk ability of the deck with the Quad Carmine and the Squawk, trying to get that donk when need be. But also, even when you're not getting the turn 1 win with this card, or this combination of cards, just the fact that you can take initial prizes on Budgies and on evolving stuff with the Perilous Jungle, you are not triggering Fez. And let me tell you, a lot of these decks insta-respond with a Fez if you take the first prize against them. So the fact that you are denying that with a Poison build is such a big deal. It's honestly one of the biggest boasts of the deck, and Archaludon can do it into the game as well, right? With the Perilous Mochi combo, you go from 220 up to 230 or 250, right? And then up to the 290 with Mochi. And all of those are triggering into poison ticks onto the most important numbers, right? So that's such a big deal for you. Yeah, it's what we knew about the engine. I think the Blood Moon is one of the only cards that you don't always see in the list. Sometimes you see Turo, but not in this case. But yeah, real deck. And it's surprisingly the highest placing Arch, because the stock of Zoro Arch, what we'll look at in a moment, was sort of going up. Also, just quickly mention that Preston also had another list that did similarly well. This time it was a trolley build rather than a box build, so it's not Carmine. This isn't even trying to donk, really. I mean, it does have Squawk, it does have one Petch and the Bonnet and whatnot, but this isn't like a donk build. This is like a let me go second and just trolley, I imagine. Arven trolley. Whenever I see a trolley, I think I'm a go second deck, right? Especially with the ball search as low as it is. So you try and initiate a prize race with Poison or with Itch, and you just say that that's good enough whilst you build a solid board behind it, so like more safely, I suppose. So a slightly different approach with that build there, but both doing pretty well at the core. Lots of Dragapult, lots of Gardevoir. That's the real story here, that they all floated to such high finishes in that top 32. It really is like looking back to the Guardians Rising, where Garb first came out. It really is that situation. I'm getting throwbacks. Some Dunce Dengos in the top 32 and just outside as well, doing okay. There was a Charizard that made top 64, pretty interesting list as well. Has Chi-Yu, which is somewhat of an answer to the Cornerstone Ogerpon. It's also able to be a one-prize option into at least Terrabox and into the Raging Bolts, so that's kind of interesting as like a clapback option with the retaliation option. The Dunce in here to give you some extra draw is kind of cool. I know a lot of decks give you Artisan for free, so this is just like a little cheeky bonus. Does have the stage 1s to try and get you into TM Evo and the Great Tree. Miss Energy is a throwback we haven't seen for a while, still a powerful card. Still something we can use against Pult, of course. Yeah, it's Zard. It's playing Briar. Briar's still really good as well, by the way. This is, again, just like I was saying with Flareon, like Briar Dusk is still just like the main set. Like this is a Briar Dusk deck, I think. It happens to be Charizard because he can hit a Squillion in the late game. A lot of these cards are like, my game plan is this card right here. This is just the game plan. And it comes off because I have Pidgeot. The highest placing Terrabox was Nicholas Moffat in 64, so overall a real, I don't know if you call it a flop, but definitely had a poor tournament overall, the Terrabox. Interesting list from Moffat with a double research in here. Does have the Buddy Buddy Poffin. Only one Fan Rotom makes me a little bit queasy. Has the Jamming Tower, similar idea to the Bolts, where you have the double zero in the tower. So that can be like pseudo healing against the Pults, which is nice, whilst also like shutting down some big tools against like Guardian Pult and whatnot. Obviously, you never like you search it when you need it, right? There's no issue with the crystal because it's normally being used earlier. Just the one Wellspring as well. I'm terrified of prizing the Wellspring. I feel like it's just a win condition card immediately, but I suppose you can navigate around it. Yeah, good shell though. It's things that we've all seen before. Nothing too kooky with it. Let's have a look at the highest placing Zoro Arch. So this was, I know, well, certainly Azul was playing it on stream a few days in the build-up to the tournament. So I don't know how like widespread it was played outside of that. So I know online it was starting to see a bit more play. But this is another trolley Evo deck. A lot of the time you just Evo into your Zoros. The one thing we saw from at least Azul's build was very much Cyrano. I feel like Cyrano plus Evo, like both in the deck, is definitely reasonable, but in this case it's just gone for the one TM Evo and the trolley and just sort of hope for the best to get your guys out, and obviously just play high counts anyway, going on in the 60. Interesting to see the double ends castle in here to try and move your guy rather than anything else. I mean, it's like a kind of neutral counter stadium, and a lot of the time Pults will try and trap the Zoro mid-game as like their win condition, because they can't hit into Arch because of the option of Black Belt Relicanth. So they're normally like tickling the Arch with the damage counter placement whilst punching Zoros is a lot of their map. So having the double Ends Castle, double Turo is a way to like circumvent that, especially with the Power Pad reloading these sorts of cards as well. It's a cool workaround, to be honest with you. It definitely shows that they were playtesting this in the build-up, because whenever I was playing this archetype, the only time I was losing was if Zoro did successfully get trapped for a turn into the Pulse. That's when you have like major issues. So that's interesting. More developments from the Zoro side of things. And Cyrano can still be in the deck, by the way, but I do think the TM Evo is definitely like a welcome include. Highest placing Bolt was top 64 from Christian. Too much to be said? Not really. The standard sort of attacking suite. Got the double crisp in here. Yeah, this is like a really standard 60. I think the Counter Catcher is the only card that you look at a little funny, because normally it's just the one boss, one prime. But yeah, very solid 60. Good to see that Bolt is still doing its thing. Cracking on with business. Just even more, so much Dragapult. Like all of these top tables in the final round, just Dragapult mirrors everywhere, bro. Top 64 Zoroark. It did make it. 64th place. Playing the triple reversal energy with Luxray in here. Very spicy. The triple Ends Castle as well. Ends Castle stays winning. Gets you pivoting, gets you into Budju. That's kind of cool. Swelling Flash, 180. Lightning typing still relevant? Not hugely, but there's just enough, I guess. It's a powerful enough single prize attacker. We know Darmanitan's strong, especially with the double Defiance. That can punish all sorts of decks with the Flame Body Cannon. We know that Backdraft can be powerful into certainly Gholdengo at the moment. Yeah, I think Zoroark's actually in reasonable positioning. I was testing a bit of Zoroark today, to be fair. If there's going to be an uptick in Gardevoir, I don't think that's necessarily bad for Zoro. I think we just need to figure out a few things. Definitely like the Monkey Dory in here. Yeah, I think Zoroark is actually like underplayed as well, actually, for how reasonable it is. But, I mean, it was a good tournament for Zoroark, right? Because Gardevoir, Zoro emerged. Zoro Arch wasn't a complete flop. And, yeah, Zoroark itself made top 64, which isn't a bad placement by any means. Any other big stuff we want to look at? Yes, I do want to look at Ben's Blaziken Greninja deck that also plays Zoroark. So just shove Zoroark in. TM Evo Zoroark is like my new favorite thing. It's like a drug. It's amazing. It's so freaking good to just do this and under budget lock just start trading in their face. Oh, it feels so good, bro. It's my favorite thing. It's a trolley build as well, so you can get all your guys out. We know that Greninja has really good type coverage right now with the amount of Terapagos around. Mirage Barrage as well can't be countered so easily because there's no mana fee, so you can do all the powerful things that Greninja has always wanted to do in this deck list, powering it up with Blaziken the entire time. I'm really interested in this list because I'm already testing for NAIC with a 70 hit point Torchic, which is like such a big deal. So yeah, I think Blaziken is getting more and more real. Very cool that this deck has the type coverage of Zoroark with Reshiram as well, so you can just bop some Guardies. This randomly has like a lot of good type coverages. Like Blaziken has good type coverage, Greninja and Zoro all like good type coverage mons, but you still have Monkey Dory that can just like offset your snipes or offset the damage that your opponent's trying to ping around your board. So low key, this does do a lot of cool and powerful stuff. And Evo for one of your stage ones plus trade is just like such a good feeling, I think, to get rolling in the game. Yeah, cool idea. I know it's 2 stage 2s and a stage 1, but it does come together because one of your stage 1s draws all your cards. It's like old times of Zoro plus stage 2s, like Zoro Desi. There were some Espatra Frostlass, just general notes. This is Israel Sosa, by the way, one of the game's greats. I do think Monkey Dory Frostlass, definitely real. The Espatra is definitely, definitely a card that you can play. You could just play more Budgies, Maractus, and Blood Moon, but, I mean, the Flittles, yeah, they're pretty bad. But Espatra maybe can cover some stuff. It's type coverage, and it can block some of the basic attackers. Is Bolt really that bad that you have to do this? I don't know if it is. Like, is Gemstone Budgie not just, like, good enough? Double Devo in here. I need to play more Frostlass Monkey. I haven't done a video of Frostlass Monkey on the channel yet, I don't think, or done a stream with it yet, so definitely need to give this deck more respect. I was saying in the tier list that it was underplayed and powerful and terrifying for the stage 2s that we've just seen dominating the top tables, so that's something we have to look at. I think that's the majority of the things I wanted to talk about today. There were some random lower placing interesting stuff like Gouging Fire and Roaring Moon both had some placements. This is a poison build of Gouging, which buffs the damage output and allows you to like manually attach on the bench while you still represent pressure, which is a cool idea. Is it the same thing for the Moon? Yeah, same idea for the Moon, where you're like soldering, attaching to the bench whilst actually pressurizing with Pecharunt. Makes sense, right? It definitely makes sense to build in the back whilst actually representing pressure without manual attachments, which is like the only thing the decks can really do these days. So turbo decks, now it's like a turbo 80 damage. That's as turbo as it gets. There was a Blissey in here as well that did kind of well. Not a Blissey Walls that you might expect, but it's like a more aggressive Bliss with the type coverage Terrabox stuff and just saying that Blissey is better than having to Crispin every turn. You just yeet and trumpet Bliss. That's cool. Like that idea. Kind of sweet. Blissey can be a chunky attacker as well when it has to. There was a Slow King. Yeah, I think that more or less wraps up Atlanta. I think right now, if it wasn't obvious, the general shift is like more towards supporter cards in your deck. Test more against Dragapult, test more against Itchy Pollen. I think Terabots could have a small resurgence. I think Zoroark is getting more and more interesting as either like a 2-2 package plus 1 Reshiram, or just like a 2-2 or like a 1-1 and TM Evo if you're playing Arven, or if you're not playing Arven, just like Jacques and Brock Scouting and those sorts of cards coming into the list, because we need to be doing things under Itchy Pollen and not just saying pass back to these Dragapults, because that's how they start becoming dangerous. If we can still pressure them with poison KOs, or if we can still pressure them with trade and actually drawing back into our own win con, like that sort of stuff is the way we can start beating these decks. Let me know your thoughts down below. Hope you enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you tomorrow for another one. Cheers.